The year was 1949. Unconditional Japanese surrender had marked the end of the Second World War. Though the fighting had been over for 4 years now, the British people were still struggling to cope with the horrors that they had endured. They were hungry for stories of heroism during the war. One BBC reporter was looking to satiate that hunger. He had picked up on an interesting lead that had the potential for a great story. A missionary who had lived through the entirety of the Second Sino-Japanese War. She had just returned home to Britain after 17 years in China. The reporter arranged for an interview with the woman, hoping that she had interesting experiences to share. This is how that interview went. Thank you for agreeing to meet me, Miss Aylward. Allow me to introduce myself. My name is Alan Burgess of the BBC. I am currently collecting stories about heroes during the war for a program that would be known as The Undaunted. I read in the newspaper that you have just returned from missionary work in China and was wondering if you have any stories to tell about your time there.
Well, Mr. Burgess, I am delighted that the BBC would wish to interview me, but I am afraid that I have done nothing of note while in China.
Madam, you say that you have done nothing of note. Do you not have any experience with the Japanese?
Oh, the Japanese are such nice people. Many soldiers used to come to the mission to attend service.
But were the Chinese not at war with the Japanese?
Well, I had once taken some children over some mountains.
Across the mountains? Where was this?
In Shaanxi, in North China. We traveled from Yanchang across the mountains to Xi'an.
I see. How long did it take you?
About a month.
And did you have any money?
None at all.
I see. What about food? How did you get that?
The Mandarin gave us 2 basketfuls of grain, but we soon ate that up.
I see. And how many children did you say there were?
Nearly 100 children.
Miss Aylward, I believe you have a most thrilling story to tell. Please do tell me about your entire journey through China.
All right. I am not quite sure how to begin this story, but I suppose I can start it here.
Most women who felt the call to serve the Lord in 1920s Britain did so in small ways on Sundays. After all, men were the ones who held the most prominent roles in society and the church. But Gladys Aylward was not like most women. She knew deep within her heart that God wanted her to go to China. She would not be content to simply be a Sunday churchgoer. Unfortunately, the China Inland Mission rejected her application to become a missionary. She was told it'd be a waste of time and money to send you. It was disappointing and humiliating. Despite the setback, the burning desire to go to China didn't die. But China was a world away, and she had no means of getting there. When all paths to China were closed, Gladys counted on God to open a way for her. That opening came one day when Gladys learned of an opportunity. Jeannie Lawson was a missionary, and she was looking for a young woman to continue her work in China. If that person could go to Tianjin, Miss Lawson would meet her there. Gladys realized that God had suddenly opened the way for her to go to China. Coming from a poor working-class family, Gladys needed to save up for the travel costs. The cheapest mode of transportation would take Gladys across Europe, through Siberia, and finally China. It would not be very comfortable, but it was the cheapest way to go halfway around the world. She purchased a one-way, third-class train ticket to China for £47, 10 shillings. There was one slight problem, however. The train would be traveling directly through a war zone. "We like to deliver our passengers alive," said the ticket master. Well, that didn't bother Gladys. "Oh, they won't shoot me. I'm a woman," she told the ticket master. Gladys wasn't worried about some as she puts it, silly old war, preventing her from reaching her God-given mission. She could only think of the excitement. Gladys Aylward would at last be going to China. However, she could not fathom the trials she would soon come to face. As Gladys stepped onto the train, she kissed her parents and her sister goodbye. None of them knew if they would see each other again. The train soon made its way out of the busy London city centre. Gladys looked out onto the cozy English countryside. It would be the last glimpse of England she would see for a very, very long time. After 10 days, the train had made its way through Europe to the Siberian frontier. Gladys witnessed a landscape she had never witnessed before. The rolling wheat fields of Poland and Ukraine gave way to endless expanses of snow-blanketed pine forest. The wilderness expanse seemed to stretch on endlessly. Being stranded here only meant certain disaster. It was in Siberia that trouble soon reared its ugly head. At one stop, the conductor of the train told Gladys that the train would stop short of Manchuria, far north of Gladys's destination of Tianjin. At Chita, all of the civilian passengers disembarked the train. The conductor heavily encouraged Gladys to leave also, but Gladys, not realizing the situation, didn't budge. The conductor resumed the trip with a train full of soldiers and Gladys in tow. After a few hours, the train came to a sudden halt. The soldiers lined up outside the train, then marched into the darkness. Gladys, still not knowing what was happening, continued to sit. Soon, the lights went out. The only noises Gladys could hear were the howlings of the polar wind just outside the train. Gladys got up and examined the train. It was completely empty. Then, the sound of gunshots rang out into the night. Gladys had found her way onto the front lines of a war. The war the Ticketmaster had warned her about was now very real to her. At the time, the Soviet Union and China were in an undeclared war, simply known as the Sino-Soviet conflict of 1929. It was too dangerous for the train to continue on its journey. Having no way to continue forward, Gladys grabbed her 2 suitcases and trudged back towards Chita. It was a miserable time, cold, dark, alone. Not knowing where she was, wolves howling all around her. After 2 days of walking, Gladys finally made it to Chita. From there, the Soviets took her to the city of Vladivostok. Gladys's passport had indicated that she was a missionary. The Soviets, not knowing English, thought the passport said machinery. Believing that Gladys was in the Soviet Union to join the glorious communist revolution, the Soviets welcomed her with open arms. When the Soviets realized that Gladys was not a machinist and had no intention of staying in Russia, their tone changed swiftly. One day, while the officer assigned to Gladys was busy, a woman approached. Surprisingly, she spoke English and spoke with confidence. "You are in danger. You must leave now. Otherwise, you will stay here forever." Gladys had no idea who this person was, but listened on intently. "When midnight approaches tonight, be prepared to leave. Have your bags packed and be dressed. A man will be waiting for you. Follow him." Gladys did not know what to do. Who was this woman? Who was the man she was supposed to follow? Is this some sort of elaborate trap for her? But she did know that she did not want to stay in Russia forever, so she agreed to the plan. That night, before midnight arrived, a knock on the door. The woman had said that he would arrive at midnight, but it was only 10 p.m. Maybe the man had come early? Nonetheless, Gladys opened the door to see a giant Soviet officer, drunk and grinning. The man began to force his way into the room. Instinctively, Gladys screamed out, "God will protect me! God will protect me!" At that, the Russian seemed to snap back to reality, then, in a daze, left the room. Now, sitting silently and in shock, Gladys knew she had to leave Russia at once. Gladys prayed fervently that what the woman had told her earlier would come to pass. She prayed that the man would come at midnight and rescue her. She knew none of the details, only that she had to leave Russia that very night. Gladys sat there in silence for what felt like eons. Had minutes gone by? Hours? Gladys couldn't tell. Then, a knock so soft Gladys thought she might have dreamed it. She hesitated, but then slowly went up to unlock the door. A man greeted her silently. They hurriedly made their way out onto the dark and silent streets of Vladivostok. Gladys followed the man until they reached the dock. There, the mysterious woman greeted Gladys. "I am glad you came. Now, see that boat over there? You must board it and plead with the captain to take you away. The boat is heading to Japan. You must board now." "Japan? But I'm going to China, and I have no money." "Go, otherwise you will be trapped here in Russia for the rest of your life." Gladys relented. She boarded the ship, where she was alone except for a young Japanese captain. After some pleading, the Japanese captain miraculously agreed to take Gladys to Japan free of charge. The boat slowly made its way out of port in the night. As Gladys looked back, the man and the woman had disappeared. As the ship made its way out to sea, Gladys looked out into the dark ocean. She was happy to be leaving Russia, but now she was heading towards Japan. Gladys began to wonder if she would ever see China. But she placed that thought into the hands of God. It would be His hand that would bring Gladys to the finish line. After arriving in the small port of Suruga, the captain instructed Gladys to travel to the city of Kobe. From there, she could take a ship to Tianjin. Gladys had no money, but fortunately, a kind Englishman paid for her train ticket to Kobe. From Kobe, she managed to find a local mission station run by an English couple. The Japanese evangelical band mission home was much more comfortable than the hotel in Vladivostok. The bedding was clean and comfortable, and Gladys finally had the opportunity to take a bath. Mr. and Mrs. Dyer, who ran the mission, treated Gladys like royalty. Gladys was tempted to stay at the mission house with the Dyers, but she knew that her destination ultimately lay in China. After a stay of a couple days, Mr. Dyer was able to arrange for a ship to take Gladys to Tianjin. After so much winding and twisting, she was finally going to China. Gladys's journey to China was full of twists and snares, so let's recap. Gladys would travel from London all the way to the Siberian town of Chita, where a war prevented her from continuing. The Soviets arranged for her passage to Vladivostok, where the Soviets were about to detain her. She was miraculously saved from potential assault. Then she escaped from her compound. The Japanese captain then offered to take Gladys to Japan for free. Next, an Englishman paid for her fare to Kobe, where finally Dyers helped her sail to Tianjin. It was a remarkable journey, sprinkled with a dose of divine intervention. It would not be the last time Gladys would see the mighty hand of God move the mountains in her way.
I went across Europe, Poland, Russia, across Japan, and into the north of China. And here I joined an old lady, Jeannie Lawson. Jeannie Lawson was Scotch. She was 74. She had spent most of her life in China, and now I had come along. I am positively sure that if we had met somewhere outside, with the idea of joining up and working and living together, we would have parted the next minute. But God is a great God, you know, and he didn't allow that. He'd evidently intended we were to be together, and so we did not meet until we were right in the middle of China, and neither of us could run away.
When Gladys arrived in the village of Yangcheng, she couldn't tell whether the year was 1930 or 1430. The Shanxi mountain ranges had isolated the province from the rest of civilization. It was a place that seemed immune to the march of progress. To the south, the mighty Yellow River formed a partial moat, totally cutting off the province from the rest of the nation. Although Shanxi was situated in the heart of China, it was practically an island. Most of the people there had never seen a European before. They thought that Jeannie Lawson was an evil spirit because of her pale skin. Every day, Miss Lawson would clean herself of the mud and spit the villagers threw at her. "Thank goodness it hasn't been stones yet," she remarked. And now, the foreign devils had doubled in number. The first year in Yangcheng was a struggle. Gladys was daily mocked and scorned. She couldn't speak the language and was a world apart from her family. The pair also didn't find any success in preaching. Miss Lawson was too old and too frail to start any major projects. But now that Gladys was here, she could finally implement her idea. "We should start an inn. See the meal caravans that daily pass by here? If we were able to share the gospel with them, they could carry the gospel message far and wide." And so they did. They named it the Inn of the Eight Happinesses. Gladys's job was to wrangle the mules into their inn. Once the stubborn mules were in the stable, they would not budge until the next morning. The muleteers would be forced to stay the night at the Inn of the Foreign Devils. While the muleteers ate at the inn, Miss Lawson would freely tell gospel stories. The stories that were told were unlike any story that the muleteers had ever heard. Soon, as the reputation of the inn began to increase, it was not uncommon to see several teams of muleteers fill out the dining hall, eagerly waiting to hear what other stories the two women had to share. Soon, even the local villagers began to come to the inn to see what all the commotion was about. The business was growing, slowly but surely. It was 8 months into existence that the Inn of the Eight Happinesses suffered a terrible loss. One night, while on a balcony, Jeannie Lawson suffered a fall. The wooden floor gave way and she fell to the floor below. Jeannie Lawson soon died from her injuries. She was the only friend that Gladys had in China. Now that Jeannie was gone, Gladys was truly alone in the world. Without income and in the middle of a hostile nation, miles and miles away from family back home. Now, it was God to provide all her need. It was God or nothing. And God would provide in a most unusual manner. One day, while operating the inn, Gladys saw a large group of people carrying a sedan chair into the courtyard of the inn. A man wearing ornate robes stepped out and directed his gaze towards Gladys. It was the Mandarin of Yangcheng. Here in feudal China, the Mandarin practically had the authority of a king. "I am looking for a woman with unbound feet. There is now a decree from the government banning the practice of feet binding. I need somebody to inspect girls' feet to make sure this decree is being enforced. That person will go to each of the surrounding villages to proclaim this decree and check feet. Now, a man cannot do this job, it must be a woman. But all the women in the province have their feet bound and cannot move about. You are the only woman who has unbound feet. You are the only person who can be the official foot inspector." Gladys thought for a moment. She realized that if she went village by village to inspect feet, then she could also go village by village to preach the gospel. Plus, the small salary would help pay for rent. Gladys accepted the position. Gladys was now a government bureaucrat, the official foot inspector of Shanxi province. The title made Gladys important in the eyes of the locals. From then on, they treated her with respect and listened to what she had to say attentively. They were especially interested in the stories of a man named Jesus Christ who lived a long time ago in a land far, far away. He lived a similar lifestyle as these peasants did and suffered many of the same hardships. The people began to call her Ai Wei De, the great virtuous one. And so the years went on. Gladys and the cook operated the inn. Gladys would then go out to distant villages to inspect feet. The people who heard the good news increased in number. The amount of orphan children appearing in the inn's courtyard began to increase also. First, it was a baby girl, then a baby boy, then another baby boy. Gladys soon found herself the mother of 5 children and the unofficial mother of many others. These years in Yangcheng were content. Life was slow. There was never any hurry. Gladys found all the time in the world to share stories to those she met and still have time to pray. It was during prayer one morning that the inn unexpectedly exploded. The raid was short, but the village of Yangcheng was practically leveled. The city walls, designed to absorb cannon fire, did nothing to prevent bombs that fell from the sky. The next few days, Gladys acted as the doctor, treating the injuries of wounded villagers. The Japanese Imperial Army was poised to seize the city, and the Mandarin called several people of note to organize a response. Notably, the Mandarin asked Gladys, who was now a good friend, to sit at his right-hand side. The group decided that it was best to evacuate Yangcheng and go to the local mountainsides. Hopefully, the Japanese threat would subside soon. Then the Mandarin made a surprise toast. He stood up and began a long winding speech about the deeds of Gladys in Yangcheng, how she cared for the poor and needy, and how she truly was a great, virtuous one. Then the Mandarin turned to Gladys and proclaimed that he believed in Christianity. This proclamation shocked the entire room, including Gladys. By doing so, he was rejecting the 4,000-year-old traditions of Confucius, which Mandarins are required to memorize word for word in favor of the words of Christ. The Japanese came and sacked the city. Gladys and the rest of the villagers had fled to the surrounding mountainsides. The news reports were often horrific. It seemed that there was daily news about yet another city that was sacked by the Japanese. Gladys did her best to tend to the needs of the villagers and those of her mission. The rough mountains of Shanxi made it difficult for the Japanese to hold any city long term. Whenever the Japanese captured a town, the nationalists would retaliate and take it back. Gladys found herself jumping from city to city. It was safer that way. Staying too long in one town meant a potential bombing raid or a Japanese ground offensive. Once it was safe, Gladys returned to Yangcheng. She could see the increasing number of children who were now orphaned due to the war. The orphans huddled together inside the ruins of the Inn of the Eight Happinesses, never knowing what was to happen tomorrow.
And by the time the war came, I had 40 children. And so one day, looking down and on this sort of all scrambling mess below, I said, "Oh Lord, I don't think I can bear any more. I believe 40 are a good round number for one woman, and please don't send any more." But you know, God doesn't always answer your prayer as you expect. That was the year the war began. And down being pushed in front of the ever-advancing Japanese enemy came hundreds and thousands of lonely, pathetic refugees. And when they had passed through our little place, there were always a few children left behind. So the family grew and grew until there were over 80.
The Japanese army was becoming more and more ruthless. Annoyed by the stiff resistance provided by the nationalists, the reprisals against captured towns were becoming more dreadful. Gladys knew that if Yangcheng was ever recaptured by the Japanese, they would likely pour out their wrath onto these defenseless orphans. Madame Chiang Kai-shek had set up a national wealth fund for war orphans, and the closest city willing to accept these orphans was the ancient city of Xi'an. Having no other choice to protect these children, Gladys decided to do the unthinkable. March almost 100 children, 300 miles over mountains and across rivers to Xi'an. She would be the only adult with no money and very little food. The journey would take several weeks, and they would be traveling while also trying to avoid any bandits or Japanese patrols. The next morning, Gladys took one last glance towards the Inn of the Eight Happinesses. It had been her home for nearly a decade, and she knew it was the last time that she would ever see it. Then, the Mandarin of Yangcheng came to send her off. May God help you. May the good fortune you deserve be yours. The Mandarin provided a couple days' worth of millet to the group. They bowed towards one another for one final time. Then the group set off into the mountain trails. The children, ranging from 2 years to 15 years old, were not at all prepared for a multi-week long hike through the mountains. Some of the older girls had spent their earlier years with their feet bound, adding to the difficulty of the trek. The millet supplied to them by the Mandarin quickly dried up. For the rest of the journey, whenever they passed by a village, they would ask for food from the peasants there. Sometimes they received more millet, other times they received nothing. Gladys had difficulty containing the children. Some would run off far beyond the group. Others would lag behind due to exhaustion. Yet, none of them suffered any major harm. Finally, by the 12th day, they had reached the Yellow River. The mighty Yellow River carried copious amounts of sediment from the mountains down into the Pacific. The current was so strong that a ship running at full power upriver could only manage a speed no faster than walking. There was no bridge to cross, and this day, the villagers had all fled in anticipation of a Japanese attack. There was nobody to ferry them across the river. There was no way that these malnourished children would be able to cross the river without being swept away. So, the group camped. They scavenged the deserted village for any food scraps. The food they did find, Gladys gave to the youngest children. She and the oldest ones ate nothing. For 3 days and 3 nights, nothing happened. No sign of movement anywhere on either side of the river. By the 4th night, one of the children asked why the God who parted the Red Sea had not yet parted the Yellow River. "Because I am not Moses," replied Gladys. The girl responded, "But God is always God. You have told us 100 times. If He is God, He can open the river for us." Hearing this, Gladys was encouraged, and the two of them prayed for the river to be opened up for them to cross. Then, the children spotted a squad of nationalist soldiers approaching on the bank. Gladys explained their predicament to the soldiers, and the soldiers provided a boat for them to ferry across. They would have to make 3 separate journeys to ferry the entire group across. They did so safely, without the presence of Japanese planes or troops. They continued on with their journey. The inclines of the mountain slopes gradually increased, and the effort to go forward was immense. In these high mountains, the signs of human settlement were nowhere to be seen. The journey had taken a month as they finally neared the city. But when they reached the city gates, they received even more bad news. The city of Xi'an was teeming with refugees. The gatekeeper insisted the city gates remained firmly shut, even as Gladys pleaded with him. Gladys was hopeless and beyond disbelief when the gatekeeper informed her that there was a refugee station further ahead. It was a 2-day train journey to Fufeng, where finally the children were admitted to a long-term refugee camp. Gladys wasn't joyous when they arrived, only relieved. She was so very tired, and all she could think about was resting. next thing she knew, Gladys found herself laying in a medical bed. "You're sick, badly delirious," the doctor said. "You must rest here until you get well." But Gladys never quite fully recovered. If she was to make a full recovery, she would need to go back home to England. Having heard of her story, an American in Shanghai gladly paid for her fare back home. It had been 17 years since she left England. It was while Gladys was in England that the fate of China changed drastically. The destruction of Hiroshima and Nagasaki forced the war in China to come to an abrupt end. No sooner had the last Japanese soldier left China before a new war embroiled the country. The warm faces of the many nationalist soldiers who helped Gladys on her way were never forgotten by Gladys. She remembered them even as they fled to the island of Taiwan in the face of impending communist takeover. Gladys was never allowed back to China. Under the orders of Mao, the last missionary left the mainland in 1953, never to return. Gladys spent her time in England, traveling around the country and preaching in local churches. Yet deep down, she longed for China, the China she once knew. Gladys returned to China in 1957, but this time to Hong Kong. Once again, Gladys went with little money on hand and with no concrete plan. The city was awash with refugees from the mainland, all hoping to escape the grasp of communism. It was on the crowded streets of Hong Kong that all of a sudden, Gladys recognized somebody. She recognized him instantly, one of the boys that had crossed the mountains with her all those years ago. Michael was now a minister in Hong Kong. The two of them helped establish a mission there, with the intent of helping many refugees there. Gladys then went to Taiwan. Now being around 60, Gladys thought she was too old to be a mother. But God thought otherwise. Soon, Gladys started an orphanage that would eventually house 100 orphans. She did this all the way till she died in 1970. Starting with the interview at the beginning of this video, Alan Burgess would write a book about Gladys's life. It went on to become a bestseller. The book then became a movie called The Inn of the Sixth Happiness. It was watched by millions of people all around the world. Eventually, her story would inspire countless generations, maybe even inspire people to make YouTube videos about her life.